Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros event. I am super excited to dive right in, but we'll give folks a couple minutes to trickle in before we begin. I love to start things off with a fun icebreaker, as you know. So I'd love to ask our expert panelists today with the holidays around the corner, if you have any big holiday plans. And we'll start things off with Maggie.
Yeah. I do not. I have 3 kids under 5. So we're staying home for Christmas because Santa Claus comes to our house and we can't move that. I'm hosting 22 people on Christmas Eve for family members and stuff, but that's about it.
Very cool. And Sarah, I see you have your pink Christmas tree already up. What holiday plans do you have coming up?
Sure, yeah. I love Christmas. I'm super excited about it. I am getting together with family on Christmas Eve and then doing like a friend's Christmas on Christmas Day. So I'm excited about that. We're doing a weird little vampire themed Christmas party just to make things a little strange.
Wait, that is so cool. I've never heard of anything like that.
Oh,
That's
neither
cool.
have I. My friend came up with it.
Vampire Christmas. Is she a big Twilight fan?
No, she just wanted to do something non-traditional.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And Conway?
Yeah, unfortunately I'm gonna cap things off on a perhaps not the most interesting note, but Christmas is just a relaxing time. We have 2 daughters that are also both under 5 years old, and so just relaxing and doing our best to stay away from any colds or flus. That'll be an ambitious plan, but I think we'll do well.
Well, it sounds like everyone's going to have a very relaxing, much needed holiday, which is great considering 2023 is around the corner. And let's get started in today's topic, sales in this economy, 6 tips to maximize your sales team performance. But before we begin, I'm going to say a few words about the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through our online session like the one you're at today. We also have an online robust forum and our quarterly summits, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And we're also getting to go back into in-person events. So stay tuned. We might come to a city near you. And speaking of our summit, we're back with another Revenue Excellence Summit next month, January 24th to the 26th, the Mega SKO, the sales kickoff for the entire modern sales community. Join us for 20 plus events with 5,000 modern sales pros in attendance. We have over 60 plus high caliber speakers. You can hear from leaders at Drift, Sales Loft, Lean Data, Stage 2 Capital, plus so much more. I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat, so be sure to secure your ticket. It's a free event and it's going to be such a fun event. Now, I'm pleased to announce our sponsor for today's event. We wouldn't have been made possible for this event without our sponsor, CaptivateIQ. CaptivateIQ empowers organizations to build the right commission plans for fast-changing business goals, balancing flexibility to support any plan component with usability to own the system and adjust commission strategies over time. They help hundreds of finance and operation teams solve the pain of managing commissions and move their plans out of spreadsheets or outdated systems to achieve fast, accurate, and audible commissions calculations at scale. Their solution has empowered tens of thousands of reps with transparent, clear, and actionable data that help them reach their sales goal. I'm going to drop their link to learn more about Captivate IQ in the chat, so definitely check them out. They're doing amazing stuff. Now, before I introduce our panelists, just quick housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded, so if you have a friend or colleague who couldn't make it, don't worry, the recording and key takeaways will be made available on the MSP previous event page before the end of day. And if you have a question for our expert panelists today, please use the chat as well. Let us know where you're calling in from. We love to know where everyone is calling in from, and also use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner. Now, enough about MSP. I am super excited to announce our speakers today. Sarah Bush is going to be moderating today's session, so I'm going to kick things off with Sarah to do introductions, and then I will come back for wrap up. So Sarah, you can take it away.
Great. Thanks, Angelica. I am super excited to be here and talk about this topic. It's so apropos at the moment. So how do we sell in this economy and maximize our sales team performance? A little bit about me. I am currently at revenue.io, and this is my first time moderating, so I'm super pumped. It's my first time meeting Conway and Maggie. So Conway, introductions?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Conway. I'm the co-CEO of CaptivateIQ. I spend a good deal of time thinking about incentives and how to align company goals with what our teams do day to day. And prior to CaptivateIQ, I was managing commissions myself for a scaling sales force, and hope that some of my experience will lend itself to today's conversation and help everybody in the room.
Great. Thanks, Conway. Maggie?
Hi, Maggie Parasini. I've worked at a few once startups, now larger companies like DocuSign, Yelp, if you can believe it, Box, and I've worked through a couple of recessions now as I approach 40. So hopefully some of the tips that I've shared, my experience, will help people as we go through this current economic downturn that we're in and about to keep going through.
Great. Thanks, guys. I'm really, really excited. I guess we'll get started then. So what are some important factors that you want to keep your sellers motivated and loyal, particularly with recession-proof sales incentives? What are some ideas that you guys have? Conway, you want to start?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I'll jump in and share a few thoughts here. So, I think a recession, as much as there's a lot of things not to like, I do think it's a forcing mechanism to really reset the business and to ask yourself, what exactly are we solving for, right? I think in the past few years, everything was up and to the right. As we like to joke internally, you could have sneezed and new ARR would have come out. And now that the tide has come in, so to speak, you're seeing a lot of problems, or things that aren't necessarily a good use of capital, or things that don't actually move the business. And so I think at the leadership level, there has to be an honest conversation about, well, what are the things that really matter, right? Because we got limited capital, we got limited time. Let's make sure that we're channeling our capital and our mind share to the things that really, really count. And so, that might go without saying, but I think I'll share two things that we've thought about internally that I think are likely applicable to everybody in this room. One is less on the strategic level and less specific to CaptivateIQ and more specific to financials. In a time where cash is king, where runway is very important, how can you help the business fund itself? And so when you think about payment terms, when you think about multi-year contracts, when you think about margin, for certain businesses where there's a heavy cost associated with supporting a net new customer, are you thinking about how you're compensating your sales reps for acquiring the most profitable accounts? And so all these things are really important, but particularly important in this kind of climate. And so I'd encourage everyone to ask themselves, well, if you're nodding and agreeing that, hey, these things are important, are these things actually incorporated into your commission plan? Are you actually rewarding people for doing the things that are important for the company? And so there's a lot of, I think, low-hanging fruit enhancements that you can introduce to help the sales team stay aligned with what's really important for the company. And then on the strategic level, I think this comes back to questions that aren't necessarily going to be the same for each and every one of us, but questions around, well, who is our ICP? For the last few years, I know I've talked to many companies, large and small, and they've gone after anybody willing to sign a contract. It might be an SMB, it might be an enterprise. And now now you're starting to see the customers that truly find value in your solution, right? The ones that cannot live without your solution. And those are the ones that you really need to double down on. And those that aren't, there's a question around, well, should we be spending money going after them, targeting them, closing them? And so I think those are some of the more strategic questions that need to be asked. But again, those are going to be unique for company to company.
Thanks, Conrad. Yeah, I love the idea of, even if you combine those things together around like ICP, like identification and focus, and then also your like most profitable accounts, those two items together are like really, really powerful. So I love that. Maggie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know they're entirely that different from Conway's, but a few separate thoughts. I think one, most importantly, when you're working with your team, I think when you're talking about incentivizing people, I think the first step is also remembering that you have to build trust with the people on your teams. And so, I think the first step is also communicating often and regularly with your team and the individuals on your team, as much as possible, obviously in person or in one-on-ones and team meetings. But I think, what's really important during times of uncertainty is checking in with everybody and making sure that we're supporting the people that are on the front lines as much as we can, because you want to ensure that you're motivating them to have the right work ethic to go and be successful. And with sales incentives, if you haven't done that piece, like the rest of it doesn't really matter. So I think that's the first step. Everyone's always worried they're going to lose their job. So you just got to continue to work with them to make sure that you're helping them to not. I think the second piece is looking at the top performers on your team and in an economic downturn. So the people who are doing really well when the economy might be suffering, what's making them successful? What is it? What tactics are they employing that your other team members might be able to benefit from? Can you have that particular or individual or group of individuals build a training around what they're actually doing? I've worked with really great sellers, candidly, people who were better sellers than I was. And what were they doing? What are they doing to go and win some of these deals? Because the creativity that I found with people on my teams has been really impressive. So I usually have them build some sort of training. And then I think just more like then going into my leadership role as far as behind the scenes, what I typically do is go look at the data within our CRM and look at what's happening maybe within the last 30 or 60, 90 days, and then look at it from maybe a more macroeconomic level, look at the last year or two and look at what's the data saying. Is it saying something different around why we're losing opportunities now? Or if you go and Gong and you listen to calls, what can you infer from what you're hearing at a really high level, what you're seeing at a high level from the data, and how can you build training and enablement materials around it? And then I think the last piece is obviously then building short ways that you can kind of incentivize that right behavior in order to continue to close some opportunities. So.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I love the idea of the top performer evaluation and just like finding out what works for them, and then also helping and enabling them or your enablement team, right? To like, how do we make that more scalable across all the people on the team? And not everyone has to adopt the same methodology, but can we pull out nuggets and transfer that information to the rest of the team? Yeah, I think it's really great. I also think it's important, from a financial perspective, when you're focused on getting cash in the door quickly, which you alluded to, Conway, it's like, okay, so you want to make sure that you're, incentivizing those behaviors. And then one way to do that too is also getting them paid, getting the reps themselves paid faster, right? How can we give you something now, instead of waiting for your quarterly quota assessment or like going through all that? Although that's an important piece, but like today, how can I give you more money for Christmas? I think it is helpful. I also think there's another piece that's important is, when you're taking a look at who your churned customers are, also being like strategic around how you're focusing on the customers that you want to make sure stay in. So everyone has a different, strategy on what does expansion look like, or who's responsible for renewals, or all of those things. But are you putting the right resources within your organization to the right people to prevent churn as well? I think is really important. and figuring out how do you expand your current customer base, because we all know that that's much easier to do.
Yeah, I agree, and I think retention is always important, especially for many of the companies in this audience. But I think in an environment like this, at least based on folks that I've been meeting with and things that I've recently read, there's a lot of downward pressure on expansion these days, and that's something that I think folks shouldn't immediately interpret as, okay, the company is starting to experience cracks. I think there's a certain cohort, if you will, of customers that are being uniquely exposed to the market. And from what I've gathered, you're seeing a lot more of this in the SMB segment. So for those of you who are more concentrated in the lower end, you're probably feeling a lot more of this. And I think that starts to beg the question, okay, is there pockets of the SMB segment that are more exposed? And if so, there's some pretty, I think, hard decisions that need to be made around, okay, well, which pockets are here to stay? Like, which ones can continue to thrive versus which ones have, an LTV that's perhaps too short for us to make bets around, and obviously I'm applying this very financial kind of lens to it, but I think it really does need to boil down to that kind of decision. Because at the end of the day, you can only put so many irons in the fire. You only have so much cash to invest. I do want to just plus one a lot of what Maggie highlighted about the top performers. Something that I've been personally involved with, and not being somebody nearly as experienced or as Maggie or Sarah in all things sales, leadership, and management. But one thing that I've found really fascinating is the extent of opportunity there is in just streamlining the nuggets of really, really good talk tracks or the really, really good demos. And so, being that, the nosy leader that I am, I'm often just watching Gong recordings here and there and asking myself, wow, that was really, really interesting, or wow, that was no bueno, and I think all of these learnings are really, really valuable. And sometimes just to get the ball rolling, it's just a matter of, sharing these things, getting into the culture of sharing those things. And, again, I think CaptivateIQ has a good amount of improvement to make around how it's enabling. But I think that we're seeing some success in just starting to build a culture where you are showcasing these things, and it becomes, a lot more acceptable to highlight, hey, what do you guys think about this? Or, hey, does anybody have a good Gong recording of, battle carding against this? And I think that's been really, really interesting to see during this these difficult market times, because it's a way to also bring the team together and to kind of work in a more nimble and agile capacity.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. I think, tools like, conversational intelligence tools, and then anything that you can do around real-time coaching and getting that in front of the rep, especially peer-to-peer, holds a lot of weight. So I really love that. Yeah.
Sure.
So, and then Maggie also brought up another point around just communication, how important communication is across the teams. And so if, this is something that is really really, really important to me. And I know that it definitely supports long-term value and growth with just promoting stronger alignment and focus. And I think that over communication is key. So as transparent as you can possibly be to the decisions that are being made inside of the organization and why is really, really important. It'll help with employee turnover. It'll help with team camaraderie. It will just make a big difference. And not every decision that's made, at the leadership level can be shared, but I would definitely challenge everyone to stretch that as much as you can. This is a core tenet of when I was at 15.5, and the transparency on both sides. It's grant trust and be transparent. And so just make sure that you're supporting that in your organization, and that will help you get really, really focused. And like I said, just build up the team a lot. Conway, what about your experience? Or I'm sorry, Maggie, what other tactics have you employed around increasing that communication? Like, what are some of the table stakes on that?
I think, I don't know how everyone else feels, but personally, I think, Zoom and Blue Jeans or whatever you use is great for having conversations, obviously, and one-on-ones. But I think I personally like the in-person stuff. So I actually manage a team that's half across the country and international, and then half of them are based in San Francisco, where I'm based. So like today, I'm in the Dolby office, and I'm here with the team. I flew them in for face-to-face time. We're going to make it productive, obviously, but the more that you can actually create those experiences, I think matters. Again, depending on I work at Dolby, so we're not necessarily startup funded by VC. So we are able to fly people here, but if budgets are tight, finding creative ways that you can get your team together and maybe a non-work setting. I've done virtual cooking classes in like the middle of COVID. So those are relatively inexpensive, but it's more about like how you can have that relationship and that human relationship, I guess, as much as possible, depending on what kind of team you're managing, remote or hybrid or in person. So we do come in the office at least once a week, myself included, and try to make those days that we're all here productive. And some of those days it's like, sitting with the SDRs, like I have a brown bag lunch session to like hear about what's not working with their messaging because, they're getting less responses. So we're sitting down and building new ways for them to communicate with people to try to get better responses during the holidays. We're driving a couple events for January. So I think those types of things really matter and make a big difference. Then when they go back home and go back to work later this week, they're really focused on implementing the stuff that we've worked on together and as a team. And then that's something that I'll continue to check in on in my one-on-ones later this week. So stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, I definitely think that that's super important. And I know there's, especially around messaging, like I love that. Like it's very, very important to all get on the same page. Conway, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily going to be specific to sales or go to market, but more broadly speaking, I think when I think about what we've done to embrace transparency, one of the things we've done recently is do kind of a all hands retro. Typically during our monthly all hands, we have a series of KPIs or updates that we go through. But for the last one, we did a retro and we looked at, here were the goals that we set to achieve at the beginning of the year. Here's how we ended. Here's a few things that we learned along the way. Some things good, some things bad. And based on all of these things, here's how we need to think about 2023 differently, right? And so it's kind of bringing everybody along for the ride, because unless you have that retro and unless people understand what the learnings were, what the good, the bad, the ugly was, I think it's hard for people to appreciate the why behind the goals that you set for subsequent years. And so a lot of what we're doing next year is predicated on things that went well or didn't go well in this past year. And so, I think that's transparency, but it's also transparency with a certain amount of like learning and growth mindset and improvement baked into it. I think one other thing that's helpful, and I'm certainly not one to say that there's a right and wrong culture, but I think transparency isn't something you can really fake. And I think in particular, this market, everybody knows there's a lot of bad news, right? Like if you're not talking about bad things, then you're certainly not being transparent. And so I think for companies that might not be, opening the hood up as often as the company would like, I would just encourage you guys to just try it. Like you'll be surprised to see the type of reactions that people have. And look, I think the biggest fear among some leaders is when you do share bad news, you lose good people. And look, there's probably some truth to that. But in my opinion, especially in this market, you want people that want to be here, right? Like you really don't have any budget or mind share to waste on people that are on the fence. And so if folks like that leave, I think in hindsight, that might be a blessing. Now that might sound crude, but I believe that. And I think, it's kind of a all hands on deck sort of motion. And, in order to kind of have that culture, you really need people who want to be there.
Yeah. And the thing about communicating things, especially that are like not necessarily positive, right, is it's happening anyway. So if your like communication of that, impacts somebody negatively, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to stop telling people what we're doing and why. Right. So I do think it's super important. I think the other thing that it lends itself to, especially in your retros, right, is like the growth mindset aspect of it, which is like, hey, like, yes, we're running this business, but we still make mistakes, right? Like it adds some like human to your work day. So I think that's super important too, for people to see that, and that helps build the trust, right? And makes everybody want to be more transparent.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then let's see. Our last topic though is about what kind of tools and training can we provide to our sellers, like to increase effectiveness and performance. Conway, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, and I think it's a particularly top of mind topic, again, for sales, go to market, and really everything, because I think you're trying to get more leverage today. You're trying to get more out of everything. And that doesn't mean asking everybody to work harder, right? It might mean, hey, there's this thing that we're doing that requires somebody to do all these manual steps. Well, maybe there's a piece of software that can automate that and allow us to be 10 times more productive, right? But, as it relates to tools that set up, I think, a sales team for more of that productivity, one of the things that I have found to be particularly important, and I'm biased here being somebody in an incentive company, but I do think that there's a lack of transparency around how people should be spending their time. And again, this kind of goes back to what we said earlier around the different financial goals that can align a sales team with the company goals. You need to make it clear to people what's important and what's not, right? And so we've gone so far in certain conversations with select AEs to say, hey, as much as there's this customer or this account that we want to win, and as much as this might be a competitive deal that would be great for a reference, based on all these other attributes around this business, perhaps the fact that they're low in ACV, perhaps the fact that they're a low margin customer, we're actually okay walking away from this. And I think that's a really hard thing for companies that have grown up in the past few years, where it's literally everything, grow, and just having that honest conversation, again, what is important and what isn't, and being okay with saying no in many of these situations. So in that kind of situation, I think an incentive plan does a great job of making things very black and white, and depending on the type of business that you have, there may be more complexity or less complexity. But for a business like ours, I think there's a meaningful amount of complexity. And so for our field teams to understand, hey, what is the implication of going after this account or not going after this account, having a system that can quickly tell them, okay, like, let me punch in, the payment terms or the margin profile of this account or the size of the account or what have you, and understand, okay, yeah, this is a big payout, this is a small payout, and that gives them a relative weighting of how they should be spending their time on these different accounts. So that's one very, very specific example. But one other one that I'd add is I've grown to, I think, really appreciate the power of enablement. I think, just kind of going off of what Maggie and Sarah were sharing earlier, to be perfectly transparent with everybody in the room, I thought it was something that was a lot more fluffy, and something that I didn't appreciate until earlier this year when I saw the difference that it could make, and I think what makes good and bad enablement is, a whole, whole discussion in itself. But I think one thing I've learned to appreciate is you need to make sure that you're creating enablement content that is consumed and that's acted upon. I think one thing that we've seen firsthand is there's a lot of hard work and thought put into these things that may or may not see the day of, or the light of day, you know, and I think it's a shame, but I think it comes back to really needing to think about the audience, in this case, your sales team, and asking yourself, is there something that has to be provided in a different medium or format? You know, maybe it's a gong recording instead of a wall of text. Maybe it's a very, very simple visual around here are the battle card points for this particular feature versus what might be, again, a wall of text, right? And so, you know, I don't have enough experience with the solutions in that space to say what's good or great, but I will say that there's, I think, this appreciation I have for the translation that has to occur to really enable your sales team. And again, enablement being a particularly important topic for where we are, because it gives your existing team more leverage, more productivity, versus, you know, feeling the need to continue to bring on more and more headcount.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm definitely a huge fan of enablement and the transparency piece, which we keep pushing on. But yeah, I think, you know, clear expectations, how you should be spending your time, and then like accountability to those things are really important to continue to just make sure that people know for sure they're doing the right thing. Maggie, what is your experience in delivering the tools like this?
Yeah, you guys are teeing me up perfectly. So in the realm of enablement, recently, I'm sure most of you have heard of the Challenger Sales book, which many sales people love. They've now sold their IP, and they do a sales training now. And so we did that at the end of November with my team. And what we were hoping to accomplish with it is just a better way to disqualify people earlier in the sales cycle, where they may not have budget, may not be top of priority. The training obviously is more about like, how can you ask those questions that are almost somewhat uncomfortable, that you'll get the answer that you want in a more straightforward way. I think as salespeople, we're afraid to sometimes ask difficult questions. But if I were to say my sales superpower, I would say that that's never been something I've really struggled with, because I'd rather know at the beginning of a process how serious someone is versus, you know, get to the end and not know, or have them just kind of run away from you and you're constantly chasing your prospects, which no one likes to do. So, that certainly, I think, has helped us, where, again, talking about managing a team in a recession, you're talking to the most serious buyers, right? Somebody might say they're not necessarily ready, but they want to continue to stay in touch. That's fine. But I think having these conversations earlier in the sales process and throughout the sales process has helped us move the ball down the field, so to speak, with a lot more of our prospects in this economy. So that has certainly helped. And I will always create more budget and find more budget for getting sales enablement platforms. So our sales enablement trainings. And then going back to the other piece of that you mentioned, Sarah, around accountability, I also believe in that. And so what we recently also purchased was something called Atrium. Feel like I'm just plugging all these people right now. So free ads. But Atrium offers my team, I guess, different insight than what a Salesforce dashboard might. Also, if we're changing KPIs throughout the quarter, which I try not to do, but if we're tracking something more closely, for example, Atrium pulls in your information from like Outlook, any Zoom or Blue Jeans meetings that you're having, as well as Salesforce. And so it kind of consolidates information and spits the information out in a more digestible way. So we've given my team access to that platform, and then I've kind of worked with them to constantly change different dashboards that I'm looking at, because I feel like knowledge is power, and a lot of the knowledge that I can infer comes from all these different tools we have, and it all pulls into this one place where I can kind of get a bird's eye view of what's going on. And so giving my team that insight and taking screenshots of it, pulling it up during sales meetings. I have just found to be really helpful for everyone to kind of understand the work that their peers are doing, going back to, like, again, what your top performers are doing. And maybe people are struggling. This is also gives some good insight there. So my teams really liked Atrium, unlike Salesforce dashboards, which I don't think everyone loves. I think it's easier. It's not necessarily just looking at one data source. It does pull in from other places. And then finally, one other thing I think about tooling in this world is, Conway, you're right. Obviously, you do come from a world of sales incentive, SaaS technology, which I think it's always great to give people insight into how much money they're making. We are actually exploring something like that right now. And then the other piece that we just purchased is there is technology that you can buy that it's not Zoom Info or any of the others, but it's technology that helps your team get more insight into their prospects and what other platforms they might be purchasing, where they might be talking to your competitors. And it has given us some key net new opportunities that have helped us as we generate pipeline. So
awesome. Great. Yeah. Yeah, I love those points. It's sales methodology in your organization is extremely important and helps to keep things consistent, right? So I think that's a big thing to push on. Yeah, when I was thinking about this, also like the alignment on the metrics and how things are measured. So I recently went through an exercise just joining revenue.io to just get like really, really clear alignment on how do we define a metric from a business perspective? How do we measure it technically in whatever system we're measuring it in the CRM? And then also like putting together like data dictionaries when you can, and then getting that back out to the whole company to explain like, these are the top key metrics that we look at, and just trying to make sure that everyone understands it. And if everyone understands it, then they know what to drive towards, and using all the different levers that get alignment across that. And just driving as much visibility and like talking about those things as often as we do at the leadership level to the whole group, I think is crazy important.
I saw a good question from Kevin in the audience.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned that he gave you some kudos, Sarah, on the moderation, and asked, you know, what's the best way to get leadership to agree to allocate funds towards enablement or LMS systems? I think it's a great question, and you know, I think it's one that requires, I think, a leap of faith in the beginning, at least to some extent. But I do think there are some like hard, fast metrics where you should believe you'll see improvement based on better enablement. So, you know, one of them might be around win rates, right? If you believe that a big part of the enablement is training on how you battle different competitors, are you seeing win rates go up? Are you seeing sales cycles improve? Or, you know, more specifically for folks who are newer in their roles, what is their time to their first X, right? Whether that's a meeting for BDR or a close for an AE. And so I do think that when you have the conversation with the person who can unlock the budget, giving them very clear metrics that you expect to improve, and some, you know, maybe finger in the air estimate around the magnitude of that improvement, I think that will go a long way and help translate things into an ROI, which is ultimately, I think, what you need to believe in for anything that you spend money on in today's environment. There's very few things, in my opinion, where you'll get a lot of support unless you have a clear kind of like ROI, even if it's as simple as a back of the envelope. So good question, though.
Yeah, I would also add, and there's just so much data around how sales enablement increases close rates and increases deal sizes. And I would say, depending on what it is that you're looking at, I would come prepared, because I just recently had to go through this, come prepared with a business case as to what specific training you're buying, what the cost is per rep, and how much revenue that you would expect to see as a result of that training.
Awesome. Great. There was also another question around consumption, AE compensation plans for next year. How do people think about incentivizing consumption? How do you think about that, Maggie?
I managed a team of relationship managers at LinkedIn, which was like salespeople that were focused on. We had like a 200% growth on the book. That was the target of the team. So we did have a consumption incentivize, or a plan that incentivized consumption, but it was actually for our customer success managers. I don't know what your setup is, Kevin, or no. Oh boy, I'm going to butcher that. Guillaume, at your company, but ultimately, like, if you have a support team like an account manager or CSM, that was who we incentivized on the consumption of it, because ultimately they were the team that was supposed to be doing that as well. And then on our team, on the sales side, one of the MBOs that we had within their comp plan was an actual, like, of the seats sold, what percentage of those were activated, and they had to reach a certain percentage in order to get, it was actually a spiff dollar amount. So that was all about how well they partnered with their CSM, where the CSM was actually directly incentivized for the consumption and having higher numbers than the sales team, where they were incentivized for working with their CSM.
Yeah. And I'll share a few things that we've seen across our customer base that have a consumption or usage based model. And, this might be payment companies. It might be fintech companies. But a lot of those types of companies have this kind of model. And there's two common comp plans that I've seen. One is where as an account executive, let's say, you may not have control over the usage, right? But the company wants there to be some critical thought put into, well, do we expect there to be good usage, right? And so that might come from the industry that we have found to, correlate with good usage versus bad usage. It might correlate with the, person who's buying the solution, what have you, right? There might be all sorts of different signals that indicate, hey, this is going to be good usage or bad usage. And you assign a certain number of points or credits, if you will, to these accounts. And when the account executive closes this particular account, they get those credits counted towards their quota, right? And so, again, not right or wrong, depending on your business, but it's an example where you're acknowledging that AE can't really control those things outside of the initial signals that they're screening. The other is where you do believe that the account executive or CSM or whoever it might be has control over that usage. And that might mean a role where they're actively engaging with the customer post signing, and they're able to kind of nurture that business. In which case it might be something where you're giving them kind of a certain payment or certain commission rate off of whatever that usage is for a certain window of time. And so for many companies, they might draw a line at a quarter or a year, where within that period, everything that's consumed will count towards your commissions, right? And so that's, again, another example. But I think the important piece is it depends on what you believe the seller or the particular individual has control over. I would stay away from any comp plan where you're measuring somebody's success based on things that are out of their control.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I actually haven't had the pleasure of working in anything that's been consumption based just yet. So I'm sure I'll be lucky enough to get there at some point, though. I think we have a few more minutes for questions. If anyone else has anything that they wanted to ask, or Maggie or Conway, is there anything else you wanted to make sure you touched on in this discussion that maybe didn't come up naturally?
Yeah, I would say this is maybe less about incentives, but one thing that looking at like just managing your sales team in general that we've done in this economy is work with more selling different types of deals. So I have the fortune of making some creative deals work for our business. So we're selling more white label opportunities, which is like some kind of partner, I guess, channel, if you will, where we're selling a large volume of minutes to be consumed to a channel partner who then is going to resell it using their platform. So they're white labeling it as their own and then putting the Dolby logo on it because there's value in that. So I think finding ways to be creative with your deals is also another thing to think about. And if you want to build incentive plans around it, once you find something that works, I think that's another tactic that you could use to drive the right behavior from your team. It's something we're trying right now. And so far it's been working. So we'll continue to iterate on that. And then I think the other thing is managing your team in this economy. One thing that I've learned in previous recessions is to sell to the people who are doing really well. So maybe let's not focus on real estate companies right now, but maybe focus on the Dollar General as a prospect. And fun fact about them, their stock went up 300% in the last recession. So, I would say thinking about the types of companies that are going to do really well right now, and the changes that are happening, I think, on a political level, what does that mean for your company, and what are the things that you can leverage as a result as far as who you sell to? We've certainly tried to then build products and specific features or benefits or whatever features that would then benefit those companies in these times where they're doing really well. So that's another thought.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good just reminder and one that I think is just easy to ignore. Go after the people that are thriving, and I think it extends to something that we try to think about, which is in a market where things aren't going to be as cooperative, what are the things that you're going to try? And I think that's a difficult thing to balance, because on one hand, you're trying not to spend money. And what I just said kind of suggests you're going to have experimental, funds and whatnot. And that's hard to justify. And so there's, I think this tricky conversation that needs to be had around, okay, well, here are the things that kind of keep the lights on, things that have been reliable and steady, but here are the things that we want to try. And I would just stress the importance of not evolving into a position where you're just maximizing, optimizing what you have. Because I think the second you do that is the second that you start to concede and you're starting to kind of shrink in this market. You have to find a way to grow in this market. And I think to Maggie's point, there are ways of growing, but you just have to think a little bit differently than you did before. Easier said than done, of course, but something that I certainly think our team is also thinking about.
I think it's a good point to just because it's experimental doesn't necessarily mean that a whole lot of capital has to be involved in it, right? Just strategically, where are you focused? Who are you going after? Why? When? Going back to the ICP. We just recently changed our strategy to be more account based, and so we have a mechanism to be very, very clear on that, right? And how do we, and then the next level would be how do we get even more specific, and then kind of break those things up and do some A/B testing on different industries or different target personas. I think is super helpful. Okay, great. Well, we're just about to wrap up. So can each of you just share any of the key takeaways that you have that you want people to walk away with? Just one or two real quick.
Oh boy. I think one, I'm just going to go back to my initial point that I feel we all talked about, transparency and communication with your team. I think that is key, regardless of anything else, and how you build your incentive plans. As sales leaders, our jobs are to deliver those incentive plans and to make sure your team is behind that. And so, I don't know. I think I get a lot of buy-in from my team in that way. And I think that's really important to then have them actually do the things that you put on the incentive plan, because it's one thing to build a plan and it's another thing to actually have them achieve it. So that's one takeaway that I would have. And I think, honestly, going back to what I think has been another theme of the things that I've said here is enablement. Get budget. If you can't, hit me up on LinkedIn, I'll help you. But like, you definitely, there's no reason you shouldn't be spending money on that's a miss. So enablement, and then thinking of ways you can do free enablement. Like I've mentioned, working with the people you already have and how they can do enablement. It's a good way to build up your people on your team too. So yeah.
And Conway?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add one thing to what Maggie shared. I think practically think about what's critical for the financials of the business. And if that's upfront cash payments, multi-years, margin, what have you, ask yourself whether those things should be a part of your incentive plan. If they're not, I think you got some low-hanging fruit just to help usher the right behavior in your field teams.
Great. Yeah, I love that. And I think, the one thing I would probably add is that is aligned with kind of those big topics are, are you setting proper expectations, and do you have a way to hold the team, accountable to those things, which involve, transparency and your comp plans and how you're incentivizing them, and how do you have like a good one-on-one with your manager? Are you doing the right thing? So making sure to focus on that.
Sure.
Well, great. This has been super fun. Thanks, guys, so much. It was great getting to know you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Conway, Maggie, and Sarah, for such an insightful discussion today. It was honestly, all your advice and insights were super, super helpful for our community. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. As a reminder, the key takeaways and recording will be made available on the MSP website before the end of the day, so stay tuned for that. And have a very safe and great holiday, everyone. We'll see you at the next event. Thanks again.